We're live. Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I'm your host, Willie Bragg. This is the Christmas edition of the Willie Bragg Show, pre-recorded prior to Christmas Eve 2022. So this would be done in the future from about a week and a half prior. So let me start by saying that before everything gets started, welcome to the Saturday night feature, Christmas Eve edition of the Willie Bragg Show. And we're going to be discussing Christian nationalism and its danger and the war on Christmas with a cheerful end to all of this. But before we get started, I want to start off by giving credit to Jimmy Sutherland. She did a great job with the new intro that I have here, and I didn't mention that the other day when I played my video. I forgot to mention that, and I want to stress that I appreciate the work she did. It looks great. It sounds great. And it's a great feature on the show. So thank you, Jimmy. And I want to also, because it's the Christmas season, the holiday season, all bases covered. Because there's the war on Christmas. Now, I want to, for this year and everything, I've been doing this for about almost 3 years. In February, it'll be 3 years since I've been an online streamer, part of this online left ecosystem. And these two guests I have here, I've been getting on them, trying to get them to do a podcast of their own. I think that they both have a future, hint, hint. But I'm not going to give them a hard time about it today. So, but let me start by saying I do want to go and thank some people for my position now, having this program here on KRTD, the Kerberos News Group Productions, and and I feel privileged and lucky that I have that I belong to the KRTD family. And first of all, I want to thank Nikki, who's a Twitch streamer. We met in the Kyle Kalinske group about a year ago, and she's been promoting my videos on her Twitch stream. And I thank you, Nikki, for what you have done. And I learned about Lucy from Nikki, and found out about the program Blue Moon Red Wine. So became friends with Lucy, and Lucy she has a great program. I urge everybody to subscribe to her program too. Follow her on Twitter, and she contacted Warren and Indy from INN because her program's with INN. And so I started talking to them, and Warren and introduced me to to KRTD, to Jimmy Sutherland, and Jimmy and Sean, and they asked me to come on board, and here I am. So I thank all of y'all for making this happen, and I hope that I can make a difference. So and anyway, so to everybody here watching tonight, if they're anybody watching, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And I hope 2023 is going to be a hell of a lot better than 2022 or 2021. God knows, better than 2020. So,
Amen.
Yes. So anyway, I would like to introduce my two guests here. And that is Dwight Welch and Joey McCorran. And I will, we've seen Dwight Welch here before. We've seen Joey McCorran, but for those that have not, for y'all seen both of these two gentlemen for the first time, I'll let them both introduce themselves. So which one of y'all want to introduce yourselves first?
Dwight, go ahead.
Okay. So Dwight Welch, my name is Dwight Welch. I'm a United Church of Christ pastor, and I get to do that through working at United Campus Ministry at Montana State University Billings. But Willie Bragg and I have known each other for 25 years, something like that. Yep. So we have had some shared political experiences as well. And yeah. And I also work with the LGBT group on campus and a lot of student groups on campus. That's kind of where my home is right now. So thoughts and prayers for students doing finals, which I guess is not happening on Christmas Eve. It's a showing, but it's happening right now.
Yeah, especially with the current Adderall shortage going on.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, Joey?
Okay, yeah. I'm Joey Mulcairn. I'm a freelance journalist, historian, copy editor, and a musician too on the side. And I've also been involved in socialist activism, left-wing activism for a number of years, going back to Occupy and the anti-war movement. Also was heavily involved in the Bernie campaign both times. And I have been lucky enough to know these two gentlemen for a number of years, mostly online, and we all, share a similar political orientation. So I'm honored to be on here. And you can follow me on Twitter. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say you can follow me on Twitter at Joe Mulk, though I don't know how many people are how much Twitter is still relevant these days.
Well, I will put everybody's Twitter link now when I make the description box, when I edit the description box and everything. So okay, I guess we'll get to the subject at hand, because we have a very dangerous situation in this country, a resurgence of Christian nationalism, and it, just reading up on history, just how dangerous it is, and I'm not trying to say Christianity is dangerous per se. I think that every religion has its good and positive points and has its darker side, whether we're talking about Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or whatever people believe. There's a positive and a dark side, and we're not here to demonize anybody that doesn't need that shouldn't be demonized. When this is not all people, this is just a movement that's toxic, that's affecting our culture for the worse. And I just Dwight and I had many discussions about this over the years, and he's always had a unique perspective about this sort of thing, and I've always trusted his perspective on these matters. So whichever, see, I guess Dwight, you want to take it away?
Sure. It is interesting to me that when you mentioned about this being an issue around the world among different religions, one of the predictors is if it's the largest group, In other words, if it's one that can actually change or affect the government. So, for instance, Hinduism in the U.S. is made up of folks who are very much committed to pluralism and democracy, but in India, that's not very clear. Catholicism has been a huge a democratic force, small d, in the United States. It's not clear that that's how it operates in Poland or among the right in Europe. And Protestants, Baptists were kind of started as a movement for religious freedom. They're the ones who our Congregationalists kicked out of Massachusetts, and here they are in a position of political power in the GOP and doing a lot of harm as a result. So it seems to be religions don't do good when they get a lot of power. They're really useful when we're a minority. It's a much healthier space to be. But one of the things that I've wanted to kind of highlight, there's an interesting book called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the U.S. by Andrew Whitehead, and this last name is Perry, or Samuel Perry. And they've actually been able to kind of do an analysis of like how many percentage of Americans probably fit this Christian nationalist vision. And they did it by simply asking 6 questions, right? 5 of which are in support of nationalism, and one's kind of a counter to kind of, you always have the one negative question so that you can, for those folks who just click all the above, qualify that, right? So the federal government should declare the U.S. a Christian nation, is one. The federal government should advocate for Christian values. The federal government should enforce strict separation of church and state. That's the negative, false negative one, right? The federal government should allow the display of religious symbols in public spaces. The success of the U.S. is a part of God's plan. And the federal government should allow prayer in public schools. Now, what they've discovered is Christians who basically say those 5, right? We're a Christian nation. We want prayer in schools. America is a part of a divine God plan. Consistently fall into views against immigrants, views against religious minorities, in particular Muslims, views against even the democratic process itself in terms of voting and trusting the democratic process, and obviously very connected with their self-identity with MAGA. Now, one of the things that's intriguing about it is those 5 questions, it feels weird that they should correlate that tightly to a complete right-wing kind of identity package. But if you listen to Laura Boebert or Margie Taylor Greene, they sound outrageous, but to about 25% of Americans, they sound like they're really Christians and Christian fighters and what have you. But the interesting thing about it, I wanted to highlight, is if African Americans are asked these same set of questions, there's a substantial percentage of African Americans who would say the same. America should be a Christian nation. We need to have Christian values. America is a part of a divine plan. We need prayer in school. But they don't then therefore make the link between that and being anti-immigrant, anti-religious pluralism, and obviously connected to the right wing kind of identity. So really, when you're talking about Christian nationalism, it's very helpful to know that what we're talking about is white Christian nationalism. These questions are actually not good predictors if you're talking to Latinos or African Americans, Christians. So we have a white Christian nationalism problem in this country. And obviously it's a problem because as we saw January 6th, as an example, it's a question of the title, Taking America Back for God. Taking back from who? Well, for the rest of us, right? For half the country, for everybody who voted for Joe Biden, right? It was stolen, but they are the true Americans. And often, I'm on Twitter as well, and I need to follow you, Joy. I didn't realize you're on Twitter. So,
Yeah.
The true Christians, whenever the real Americans, the real Christians, this kind of discourse, is feeding into kind of the polarization. And for whatever reason, immigration has this is. I want to also highlight that this is not the same thing as conservative or Orthodox Christianity. They've actually been able to make distinctions here. In other words, people who are theologically conservative, which I'm not, don't necessarily pull up this well. In fact, conservative and evangelicals and Catholics, the more likely they go to church, the more likely they're going to be supportive of immigrants, right? Immigration, especially in the Catholic Church, where immigration is such an important part of the Catholic story. Specifically, it's those 5 political questions. When you go that way, it's not just that you're conservative, it's that you have a vision of America as wrapped up into your Christianity. If George Washington is your vision of Washington is as important as it is of Moses, right? That's where you get the nationalism piece and the anti-immigrant piece, and the isolationism piece. They're all kind of part and parcel. So I mentioned this just because there's good sociological data. This is not just a political slur, right? Or just saying, here are Christians I don't like politically. This is an actual demographic that sociologists have been studying for years and can pretty much anticipate a whole range of social and political positions and actions as a result of those studies. And it is very much wrapped up in a vision of what the U.S. is or should be. And I find that in my hymnal, we have songs like, in Christ there's no east nor west, or oh God of all the nations, right? Christianity is a global religion. Most religions are global religions, and nothing American about it. Jesus wasn't American. America's not even mentioned in the Bible. It's shocking. It's not a thing, and not a lot of white people in the Bible either. It's not really a white person's story in that sense, but when it becomes one in the U.S., then you're bumping up against white Christian nationalism. And it's a pain for the rest of us who consider ourselves Christian and don't want to support nationalist politics of any kind.
I actually have a question for you, though, Dwight, because when you talk about, I take the point about sociological data backing it up that it's mostly white Christians who feel that way. But one thing I do wonder is if that's shifting at all, because one of the most unexpected phenomenon of the past 6 years or so is that under Trump, of all people, there's been a massive realignment of Latinos towards the GOP. Obviously Democrats still tend to win a majority of the Latino vote, but it's a much narrower majority than it used to be. And I wonder if that's at all connected to the Christian nationalism with Latino evangelicals, or perhaps if that shift, it might not be, though. It could be that the shift is occurring for another reason, because obviously a lot of this is happening in places like Florida, and I don't know necessarily that the Cuban Americans in Florida are all that religious. It might just be because they're like hardcore anti-communist and liked Trump's red baiting, but I don't know. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, they have been able to do studies on the. I'm getting a little feedback here, sorry, but of Latino voters, and it made a difference if you're a Protestant or Catholic, right? And Protestants largely of the evangelical variety, and they're peeling off to the GOP, and there's a lot of so that may be a multiracial at some point Christian nationalism, but also Latinos are always an interesting category of what is when you do the surveys, you'll have like white and then white, Latino. Latino can be a vision of can fit a certain kind of whiteness. It's kind of like saying in the 19th century, Irish was not white and Jewish was not white.
Exactly.
Now you have Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and all sorts of good Irish names.
Yeah.
Rudy Giuliani and the Italians, they weren't white, but so I hate to say that because that's a concerning in terms of the kind of vision of what we'd like to hopefully see in our country, but it's not clear that Latinos couldn't become white as well, in a way that African Americans are never quite afforded that status. So
Right.
Well, the way I look at it, I think with Florida, I think maybe with the Cuban and a Venezuelan population, I think it is mostly a quote unquote anti-communist sentiment that flocks them to the Republican Party. So I think that in 2008, maybe the Cuban American population did kind of somewhat gave Obama a chance in 2008, but I think that they kind of went back to the Republican fold, and I think that will explain Florida that they're kind of wedged in the Republican fold. Nationally, I think it's basically the anti-abortion, maybe the social conservatism that maybe the Latinos find appealing. That might be why there might have been some inroads made by the Republicans.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And whether they're evangelical Protestants or predominantly Catholic, still, or what have you, either way, they're it's still the social conservatism theme still resonates.
Yeah, and there's a term I'll throw out. But I can't remember where I got it from. Compound identities, But American politics is starting to look like this. So compound identities are the ways you might have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 identities that are significant, and they mutually reinforce a certain kind of social and political vision. So, for instance, if you're a gun owner in Broadus, Montana, who voted for Joe Biden, you're kind of a lonely guy, right?
Yeah.
And at the University of Montana, the precinct that surrounds the university, about 80% voted for Biden. So let's say you drive a Toyota Prius and are vegetarian and you voted for Trump in Missoula, Montana. You might also be lonely too, because
it can happen.
So I think that the way evangelicalism has been associated with a certain GOP conservative identity is intriguing, so much so that there was a study: half of all Muslim Republicans consider themselves evangelical.
Wow.
And a quarter of all Hindu Republicans consider themselves evangelical. It's like, it's a specific Protestant term, right? But it now means in American society, I'm religious, I'm socially conservative, and I take my faith seriously, and obviously Republican, right? So a lot of people, there's a lot of evangelical Catholics, and I
wonder if that's true for the Hasidic Jews also, who have been shifting Republican as well.
Oh yeah, I could imagine. I wouldn't be shocked if there was a percentage that used that term for themselves.
Yeah, that's true. Evangelicalism in the United States doesn't mean what it means. Theologically, historically, for the longest time, it's a new meaning. When somebody says they're an evangelical today, whether they're an evangelical in what you think an evangelical is, or whether they belong to a Lutheran or an Episcopal church or something like that, if they label themselves as an evangelical, it pretty much means I'm a MAGA Republican.
Yeah, and now there is a flip side. In the sense that if you're center left, the percentage of atheists who believe in God, I think it's something like 20% of all atheists in America believe in God, which is kind of contradictory to the phrase atheism is supposed to be. But in the United States, atheism tends to mean I don't like the religious right, and I'm on the left, and I'm committed to a vision of kind of left of center politics, more than it has to do with what you believe about religion. And so atheism is a political category, and so is evangelicalism in the U.S., which can be very confusing to pollsters.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and that just kind of goes to show how differently religious identity is around the world. Like, I think too about Northern Ireland and how Protestant and Catholic there are very distinct ethnic categories, and not just ethnic, but obviously who you sympathize with. Like, it makes me think of the old joke that Christopher Hitchens told about a guy who gets pulled over at a checkpoint by some unspecified militant in Northern Ireland who asks, "Are you Catholic or Protestant?" "I'm a Jewish atheist." "Are you a Catholic Jewish atheist or a Protestant Jewish atheist?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my. Yeah.
That's perfect. I love it.
Of course, I would imagine that when you think about the UK, that Northern Ireland is sort of the Bible Belt of Ireland, of the UK.
It's interesting. Well, it does feed into, just as a diversion, but Northern Ireland, the largest political parties tend to be very conservative Protestant, right? And not LGBT supportive, and things of that nature. So that would feed into it. But to give you an idea also of how politics works, in Judaism in England tends to vote conservative. In the U.S., it tends by about 3/4 tend to vote Democrat in the U.S. So that, and when I talk to Jewish Americans, often that political identity is, well, it's a source of pride in a good sense. I mean, legitimately a source of pride. Like when you look at the social justice movements, and in the U.S., it's hard to discount the huge involvement of the Jewish community with that. But that's not the case in every place, right? Around the world, but yeah.
I would imagine that a Jewish Tory in the UK would be an equivalent to a down the line corporate Democrat in the United States who's Jewish. That's what I would imagine.
That makes a lot of sense, because I mean, I think in the UK there obviously is not a religious right, so Tory identity is very much more connected to a sort of like secular cultural conservatism, I think, or a secular kind of British nationalism.
Yeah, that's what I gathered. And I know that there's been a shift in to a loyalty toward the Tories by the time Thatcher came along, because I know that Labour started to move away from supporting Israel in the 1970s, and I think that's by the time Thatcher came along, she made sure that she was her language, that she was supportive, and so a lot of Jewish voters started voting Tory in the UK. So in America, there were a lot of Jewish voters who might be supportive of Israel, be sympathetic to voting for Reagan or Bush or whatever. The big drawback was the religious right. They're like, yeah, but the religious right won't have our back. So they know it's safer to vote. I mean, as far as the two-party system is concerned, they know civil liberties wise, it's safer to vote for the Democrats.
And on top of it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, I was going to say, some encouraging news in terms of Jewish numbers, just as a side note. Reform, conservative, and non-affiliated Jews are moving even tighter within the Democratic Party, where you have Orthodox, and you mentioned, the Hasidic community that has come to embrace at least some portions of the Republican Party. So it feels like a shift to the Republicans, but when you look at the overall demographics and voting patterns, American Judaism actually hasn't changed that much. People are sorting themselves out on just like they are in Christianity and lots of the in terms of one's politics. So
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I could see too how with how some Reform Jews who may have in the past been hawkish on foreign policy would have voted for Bush in 2004, and even Mitt Romney actually did respectable with the Jewish vote. But I think that as the overt anti-Semitism in the GOP has come to dominate, some Jews who actually recognize right-wing anti-Semitism have shifted to the Democrats, whereas the Hasidic Jewish community are just very hawkish Jews. I think still, frankly are sympathetic to that same sort of white, obviously not white Christian nationalism in their case, but white Jewish nationalism, and tend to have a particular hostility to, people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and for that reason, because they, tend to see, and for that reason, they tend to tolerate the anti-Semitism from the right because they see it as the lesser evil.
There was a commentator. I don't know if y'all have heard of Wild Bill for America on YouTube. There's a commentator.
What did you say the name was?
Wild Bill for America.
Oh, I've heard of him. Yeah,
He's
on.
With the cowboy hat and everything, and he's a Christian Zionist, and I mean, like evangelical, whole 9 yards. But he kind of borders on, and I'm going to do a video on this. I'm going to be doing a video on this on Saturday night, like day after tomorrow, Saturday night, because today's like December 15th when I'm recording this, so it would be a December 17th show. I'm going to be doing what's called what is QAnon neocon, and he is the definition of QAnon neocon just as much as Dinesh D'Souza and those fuckers and all that. But pardon my language, folks. But anyway, he's one of those that pretends to love the Jewish people, but I'm not convinced of that. So he basically was talking horribly about Rashida Tlaib, because Rashida Tlaib, this is like about a year and a half ago. Rashida Tlaib, some comments that she made about Israel, and he was urging the U.S. government to arrest her and put her in Guantanamo Bay for her words. For her words. Free speech warrior he is.
Yeah.
He claims he's a free speech warrior. This is why I moan and groan about free speech all the time. I'm so tired of right wing all the time claiming that they have the monopoly on the term free speech. When, and the gullible center seem to believe that the left only engages in the council culture and nobody on the right does. And that's why I get sporadic about go on this thing. So anyway, I'm kind of getting a little bit off subject. I'm sorry about that, but I just wanted to talk about that for a quick moment.
Right on. I mean, Melvin, you and I talked. I'm sorry, or if you go by Willie on here, we talked a lot about that the last time I was on. It's just monumentally hypocritical, like especially since there's this. I'm sorry to go further on a tangent, but I just thought of this. There's this group, Moms for Liberty, which is just an Orwellian name because they go around and try to get books for a whole plethora of reasons, books banned from schools, banned from libraries. So it's just goes to show what honestly gaslighters they are, in that they're doing exactly what they accuse us of doing.
Absolutely.
Or the other one is, they support parents' rights. Well, what about the parents of trans kids? Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Florida. Can you imagine the number of parents like, actually, I would like my kids to be able to read these books.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're talking in Florida. We're talking about a so-called Christian governor that basically has a law that legalized murdering protesters. Y'all know about that, right?
Yeah, it's the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and I have people that tells me I'm making that up. I'm like, no, it's the truth.
A lot of states have laws like that, and they were all written right after the George Floyd protests. That makes it legal to essentially use a car to run over protesters, right?
Jesus
Missouri
Christ.
passed a law. Florida. I won't be surprised if there's like at least a dozen states that have laws like that.
Yeah. It's all wedged into this culture war that's kind of tied in with this whole Christian nationalism thing.
Oh yeah, and the one that was very oddly specific was there was a law passed in North Dakota that specifically targeted anybody who protests oil pipelines. So they were,
wow.
Yeah, they were they really wanted to know we like most protesters if they have a right cause, but oil pipeline protesters which often happen to be Native Americans.
Yeah, and I would bet that some of the people involved in drafting an early draft of that law were probably lobbyists from like one of the oil companies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, now I'm going to go old school Marxist, okay? Just for a second.
No problem with that. I'm not a practicing Marxist, but I don't have a problem with that.
You see the T-shirt from the 70s? It's got the Marx Brothers with Carl, Groucho, and Harpo, and it says, "Sure, I'm a Marxist." So, anyways, when I was in the Wyoming Association of Churches, there was we were Protestant and Catholic bodies that worked together on various legislative issues. But one of the things was that we kept the Catholics on, but their name, it was only a name. They never showed up, and they never actually contributed anything. But it felt like the name was kept because of the PR purposes. That is, if you represent the Catholic Church as well as the Protestants, mainline churches in Wyoming, you represent a significant group of folks. And so it was salient when we go to the legislature and try to argue for various kind of things that say who we represented. And these were mainline Protestants for the most part, right? So a lot of it had to, their biggest legislative win was to get a daycare center in the women's prison, right? And to figure out ways to kind of meet social service needs. That was but they always stayed away from abortion and gay rights because they knew that they couldn't alienate the Catholic Church. But anyways, finally the diocese wrote a letter to the Wyoming Association of Churches saying, you're too pro-gay. We don't like you because you're pro-gay and you're pro-choice. And the Wyoming Association of Churches had never done a single thing on the issue. Later on, discovered that a significant portion of the wealth that constitutes the Catholic Church in Wyoming is connected to the fossil fuel industry. And the one thing the Wyoming Association of Churches had been focused on was climate change, environmental legislation, and all of that. And so that's what we were bumping up against. So my Marxist statement is, it's certainly the case, I suspect, that there are bad faith actors who use the culture war when really it's something much more mundane like oil companies.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it makes me think, and obviously I'm sure you know about this better than I do, but it makes me think of how when you go back to the 70s, like the origin of the religious right was just sort of a subtext for defending like private segregation academies.
That's right. Yeah. That is the origin of it. And it's a dirty little secret. It was the origin of it, and then they added a few more issues here and there, and kind of steamroll into this authoritarian movement that especially Dwight and myself seen culturally evolving through the 80s and everything, and Dwight and I've had this discussion many times. We can't have nice things in this country largely because of this movement. We have a almost non-existent labor movement. We don't have universal health care. The average employee can't have 5 weeks off vacations like they do in places like Germany and Holland and places like that. And I think that, I'm going to sound like a Marxist, sometimes it's like religion is the opiate of the masses. I think that the Jerry Falwell variation of Christianity that was culturally toxic in the 80s happened to further destroy the New Deal consensus. It was not just Ronald Reagan himself, but it was with the help of his lieutenants like Jerry Falwell. I remember Dwight and I had a discussion with some socialists years ago, and they were making fun of our brand of politics. And he said in 2004, Dwight, you may remember this. He said, what was it? Something about Canada had Tommy Douglas, which gave everybody universal health care. We end up with Jerry Falwell. that, and fill in the blank,
Yeah, exactly.
There is, the largest church I shouldn't say the largest Protestant church in Canada is the United Church of Canada, which is mainline and very much. It's so funny because I was talking to a United Church pastor about it. He goes, they're the NDP at prayer, the New Democrats at prayer, and which is their left of center Labor Party in Canada, but in the U.S., it's the Southern Baptist Convention. And that just changes the religious narrative. Though I will say that when I talk to Canadians, American culture is so ubiquitous, in Canada, that if you ask a lot of Canadians, they'll assume Southern Baptist is what it means to be Protestant as well, because American and Canadian politics kind of feed into each other at this point. I wish it didn't so much, but it's hard to escape America's political discourse. The funniest part is learning about Bernie Bros in Canada, where you're like, you can't vote for him. He's not in your country. Or right wingers who say, I have a Second Amendment right to own guns, and they live in Alberta. And you're like, no, you have no Second Amendment. The Charter of Rights does not guarantee guns.
I have a funny story. I have a funny story about Alberta. When the NDP took over the provincial government of Alberta several years ago, about almost a decade ago, and I was telling one of my coworkers in my previous job, who's from Texas, I told him about this NDP government that took over Alberta, and I said, James, let me tell you what an NDP government is like taking over Alberta. That would be the equivalent of the Green Party taking over Texas.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. That's very accurate. By the way, they're having an election in March, and if polls indicate, they may just do it again. They may have it over in Alberta. Wow. Yeah.
Oh,
they have somebody who's a little too inspired by Trumpism, who became the head of the Conservative Party in Alberta.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say that even makes me think of how surprising it's been here to see Georgia as a state shift slowly towards being a purple and maybe even light blue state. Like, when Biden won in 2020 and then, Warnock and Ossoff won, it was easy to dismiss as a fluke, but then Warnock was reelected. So, seems like, it's sort of analogous to even see, the NDP winning in Alberta, surprisingly, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I have a theory about Warnock. My theory about Warnock is that the racists were in a dilemma who to vote for. I was like, in the second runoff, it was like they don't want a black man either way, so they just sat out that election.
Well, this was intriguing and encouraging, but weird. There was a percentage of Kemp Trump supporters who voted for Warnock, which meant, well, it always means there's persuadables, right? And that happened with Fetterman as well.
I think that's because they focused on meat and potato issues. Like, I saw some of Warnock's ads where he was like, talking about what he'd do for peanut farmers in Georgia. So I think he had like a genuine sort of Southern populist kind of appeal. And Fetterman, had a similar sort of Rust Belt populist appeal.
I think that's, And
one thing I will say about Warnock, one thing that does impress me about Warnock, he did a sermon one time on 2009 on socialized medicine. And I saw this from Kyle Kalinske. He played this video of him doing a sermon on socialized medicine. And whereas a lot of people on the religious right, a lot of the evangelicals will tell you how evil socialism is, it was kind of refreshing seeing somebody of faith preaching that socialized medicine is actually a good thing. Again, Tommy Douglas in Canada, Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, later on the New Democratic Party. Brought about Medicare for all in Saskatchewan, and then eventually all over Canada. And And Nye Bevan, the Minister of Health in Great Britain after World War II, called the National Health Service. He called it Christianity in Action.
This is that makes, I mean, literally the most salient, just as a total side note, the most salient feature of Jesus's ministry in the Gospels is he was known as a healer and an exorcist. Right? That was basically, and the way the gospel stories always portray it is, I mean, everybody who's just poor and has no shot in life, they just flock to him, right? Because that's what he's doing left and right, is doing these kind of mass healings. And it seems weird that a movement that should be based on that would in the modern era tell us that, oh no, public health care, how terrible. There is an interesting, also one other book recommendation. Kevin Kruse, who's over at Princeton, he has a book called One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Invented Christian America. And in some ways it ties in. By the way, that's not a, that's useful for not only evangelicalism, but it happened in the main line as well. My denomination, the United Church of Christ, back in the 30s, we were called the Congregational Church, right? And that was part of our founding, was the Congregationalists. They were going pretty, not only New Deal, they were going all the way to socialism in terms of the kind of public pronouncements they were making. There was a lot of wealthy folks who the Congregationalists never had a fundamentalist liberal split like every other Protestant church did, right? Every other Protestant in the main line split over the Bible, evolution, women, now LGBT. This never happened with the United Church of Christ. It never happened with the Congregationalists. But the closest thing we ever came to split was there's a lot of wealthy industrialists from the 30s into the 50s who demanded that what would become the UCC not say these radical pronouncements about economics. Right?
So in other words, they were your proto-libertarian type, socially progressive, but economically regressive.
Yeah, and some of the earliest founding of religious right institutions in the country in the 50s and 60s are these kind of proto institutions where literally you can connect to this industry or that industry, this corporate group or that, or this wealthy family or that. I mean, after all, the Rockefeller Chapel, have you guys ever seen the chapel at University of Chicago?
I don't think so, no.
And I've been to Chicago several times.
It's a gorgeous, when you realize, though, that John Rockefeller paid for it.
Okay.
Wow.
And it was a kind of the citadel for liberal Protestantism in the U.S., and it was underwritten by Rockefeller.
That explains a lot.
This reminds me of the other person that's worth reading is Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a kind of on the left and was a United Church of Christ minister. But back in the 30s, he would say, we'd have these clergy say, "I'm a radical because I don't believe in the virgin birth. I don't believe in the, this or that supernatural thing." He goes, "Prove to me you're a radical. Go into your pulpit and say unions should be able to organize." Because he was in Detroit in the auto factories, because there was a lot of car executives in those churches, and they didn't mind doubting this or that religious doctrine, but don't doubt their prerogatives as CEOs. Yeah, Reinhold Niebuhr is Moral Man in Immoral Society. But he kind of, if you wanted interesting Marxist / Christian analysis of, because he was there with the unionization of the auto industry in the 20s and 30s.
Now, historically, I'm thinking of people like Gerald L.K. Smith and Father Coughlin in the 1930s. Are you, Joey? Are you familiar? I know you both will be familiar with Father Coughlin, but are y'all familiar with Gerald L.K. Smith?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Dwight?
I've heard the name. I knew he had a radio show, and I know it was anti-Semitic. There's a lot of folks who kind of like got enamored by FDR the first year or two, but then they had their hobby horse, whether it was in terms of anti-Semitism or some other kind of thing. So it was, it actually, these are good precedents because they kind of fit MAGA a bit. MAGA is not opposed to government being used, but they have a specific vision of who it would benefit and who they would want to hurt with it. They're not libertarian types. They're so the Coughlins or whatever, all these folks, they initially liked the idea of the New Deal because they envisioned this large government that could do things. But then when it was helping African Americans,
yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, it was helping immigrant communities. All of a sudden, they denounce FDR, and
it's kind of similar too, also because you mentioned the MAGA movement, to how there's people within the MAGA movement that are former liberals or may have even voted for Obama because even if they were racist, maybe they liked that at the very least he was campaigning on things like the public option, and then shifted, come 2016.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's
I think what did it in, unfortunately, I think a lot of folks that voted for Trump that would not have voted for Trump was when Hillary Clinton was doing what a lot of Democrats were doing previously, and was speaking the Wall Street line, and that's just a product of what Reaganism had done to the Democrats in the 1990s, and that is still it just left a bad taste in my mouth since the 1990s, seeing what the Democratic Leadership Council, that vessel of Reagan, Reagan invented it. It was influenced by Reaganism. It was a product of the Reagan Revolution. That corporatism just stayed in there, and a lot of the people who would have voted Democrats felt left behind. And then a demagogue like Trump came along and started talking this populist talk, and so they were like, well, he said he's going to keep the jobs here. He said he's going to do this and do that, and so they were like, well, what the hell, and Michael Moore. Michael Moore said that Donald Trump was a human Molotov cocktail. Basically, and that it will be the biggest. It was voting for Trump for some people will be the biggest FU in the history of this country, and it will feel good for 10 seconds, and then reality will set in.
And to add on to that, I think we were talking about the shift of the Latino vote to the GOP earlier. I think there's an element in which, in the same way that Trump appealed to white working class voters who previously voted Democrat. He may have had some appeal to working class Latinos as well, who also felt they were being ignored by the Democrats and were willing to overlook the anti-immigrant demagoguery. Sorry.
That's okay. I've done that.
Yeah.
We all done it. You're excused.
Thank you.
No, but Brexit, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, there was ideological division on Brexit now.
What?
There was an ideological division. There was an ideological division on Brexit. There
was. The issue is it got wrapped up in the same sort of dynamics as Trumpism, and in the end, the UK is definitely staring down. They have their economic prospects have been so diminished within the last couple of years. Now, intriguingly enough, though, this does kind of interest me, is that as divisive as Brexit was, the polarization that you see in England is nothing compared to the U.S. In other words, they've done kind of surveys. I'll give you a lovely example. When Boris Johnson was, he was having those parties during the COVID shutdowns. Apparently, people didn't like this, right? And it was really unpopular. And it started the calls for his resignation. And the thing about it is, you couldn't find a party correlation about how he responded to Boris Johnson. It's kind of like Elizabeth Tuss, right, where she had like a 15% of approval rating before she got essentially forced out of the job. I mention all this because in most countries, when you do popular things, your poll numbers go up. And when you do unpopular things that most people don't like, your numbers go down. And there's only one country in the world where that's just not the case. Well, there's a couple: Hungary, the U.S., and Russia. We mirror, we mirror each other. And you know, if Boris Johnson had been a Republican who said and party during the COVID stuff, it would become a patriotic requirement to party during COVID.
Yeah.
And we're the only country in the world like this. So England is, even though you kind of it's sad to see what happened with Brexit, but it's kind of like going, no, they are not near as divisive as that was. It pales in comparison to where the U.S. is. We act more like
they'll find a reason to have a culture war over everything, and I'm talking about one side, and that is one side, and that is the right. And I'm not saying that everybody that's right leaning is a terrible person. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that there are demagogues on the right, and there are probably some loud people on the woke side of the equation that they're as obnoxious, but I think it's more on the right. And again, not every right-leaning person this applies to, but I'm talking about some obnoxious activists, partisan hacks that want to keep a culture war going. So, and they don't care how destructive it is to society. They want to own the other side. If there's a shooting, they will go and find a way to blame the left for this, or there is whatever. There's a, they'll say it's a trans person. They'll say, it's a teacher unions or Soros or they'll find something and it will kind of seep its way in a more sanitized form on Fox, but they'll play around with it and they'll softly say it.
And one thing that depresses me too is that it's gotten so much worse than it was even fairly recently. Like, when you talked about the UK and how everyone reacted negatively to Boris Johnson, there's a time not too long ago when this country was slightly less polarized on cultural issues. Like, think about how wildly Bush's approval ratings swung compared to Trump's, which were fairly static until January 6th. Like, remember in 2008, after the financial crash, after Hurricane Katrina, Bush's approval ratings got down to 25%. I feel like, partly Trump and partly, the rise of social media echo chambers has just amped up the polarization to levels at which it's, never been before, or perhaps not since the Civil War era.
Yeah, you can't see the swings. It's crazy. The other one I remember from my high school days is when George Herbert Walker Bush had a 91% approval rating, and that was in the beginning of the Gulf War.
Wow.
There's no world where that exists today, right? There's, the idea that Biden or Trump or any candidate could get really even much above 50%. Or below 40, though Trump is at 38 right now. So there you go, 38% approval. But usually it's that range. You got 40% of America who's just with you regardless.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's a point at which we move into a new political era where there's some level of depolarization, because it's happened before in history, and it could happen again. It's just interesting to think about the ways that, American politics might shift in the future. Like, maybe there's going to be some new phenomenon we can't even conceive of at the moment that will make the social media bubbles obsolete. Who knows?
Well, and I would say some of the conversation, I think what you're describing is actually more likely. I will say that one of the things that I've enjoyed in some of the mainline churches is that there often in rural communities like in Montana, one of the only places where Democrats and Republicans occupy the same space, and in a community together. And so there's a bit of me that kind of thinks of, ministry in the 21st century is just getting folks into the same room, not to split the difference or say, we'll take half a Biden and half a Trump, right? And not like that. But what I mean is just because there's some of the political positions on the right that are you can't split the difference. You just have to reject it, right? But more just the humanization level, the fact that there's these two people in community and they're hanging out together and they like each other. When Melvin introduced me to
Willie.
Oh, Willie, sorry. So Willie, what was the British show? Not All in the Family, but
Till Death Us Do Part.
Yeah. So at the end of what I loved about Till Death Do Us Part is that it felt like almost after every episode, after they yelled at each other about religion and politics and everything else, and they went out to the pub. Or they went up to a match.
Actually, Alf and Michael on Till Death Us Do Part had a better relationship with each other than Michael and Archie on All in the Family. I mean, they loved their soccer game. They loved their beer. And when they went out drinking, I mean, they were okay. They were jolly.
I think what that shows to me too is that because there's a much stronger class identity in England, and they might have both come from the working class. They kind of shared a culture, whereas here Michael was supposed to be sort of the worst type of well-educated college elitist liberal, and Archie was supposed to be the worst type of like working class loudmouth bigot, and so they didn't really share a culture, and Michael probably looked down Archie's nose to some way, and that's another way in which I think British politics have historically been better than American politics, is that there was sort of this more of a stronger working class unity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe too, sorry, this is kind of a tangent, but maybe too the elitist liberal stereotype is one that's more distinct to America, because maybe in England, like the type of people who would be elitist liberals here would have just always been aligned more with the Tory party, or even with perhaps the Lib Dems, or back then the Liberal Party.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge thing. I remember Christopher Hitchens was talking about his childhood and how he ended up going to boarding school. And the quote he had from his mom was, well, if there's going to be a ruling class, Christopher's going to be in it. Right? And that meant sending him to boarding school, right? And all that entails. Yeah. So it's very different. I think that's a very useful way to kind of distinguish. Now, I'm going to do a weird detour to say that one of the things that I do resent about the war on Christmas is basically, like, not everybody, but like most people like the NFL, most people like Christmas, most people like food and gifts and time off, and most people like a number of these things. There's just things that it doesn't really matter your politics. And one of the things that's been really annoying is that every culture war issue the religious right picks up wants to take the most common symbol that a lot of folks like and try to make it into a right-wing icon. So that now you're second guessing yourself and you say, like I literally have a foster sister. She was like, oh, I used to like the Dallas Cowboys, but I heard they were protesting and I can't support that. I'm like, really? You like football? Just enjoy the football. Just watch it. Exactly. You don't have to make a political statement, but everything has been politicized, so we can't just enjoy common things.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of liberal NASCAR fans too, and yet you see them chanting, the infamous, of course, like and moronic "Let's Go Brandon" meme, fuck Joe Biden as it originated. Sorry if I shouldn't have said the F word on this broadcast.
But no, that's exactly. I mean, we had that with boy. I went to the Sheridan, Wyoming rodeo. I used to be a pastor in Sheridan, Wyoming, and there was a lot of humor that was just based on. They had made jokes against Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Obama supporters, and it was clearly a family event. I mean, everything about it was a family event, and they never would have used the F word, But to me, I wrote a letter to the editor going, is this really a community thing for us all? If you can use humor to literally marginalize groups who are in Billings or in Sheridan, there's a problem, right? There's an issue here. You've made rodeo into this kind of, just like you said, NASCAR, same thing, and let's go Brandon, and whereas why can't you just enjoy, we'll just enjoy something together.
I mean, especially since historically there were Jewish cowboys. I mean, I've read about that, so there's probably still some Jewish rodeo fans.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. And I knew some Jewish folks when I was in Sheridan, Wyoming, and we've got a synagogue here in Billings, and they're very much a part of our kind of common life here. Always a small minority, but always a significant and small minority. And to see casual anti-Semitism, not vicious, but if you're on the receiving end, it can feel that way, just casual and thoughtless. But it was born out of, well, we all agree with each other, aren't we clever? That kind of weird isolationism. Where it's the way Christians talk about Jews, for instance. It's not always directed hatred. It's just I don't think you've actually met anybody who's Jewish. Have you actually ever talked to anybody?
Exactly.
You talk amongst yourselves, obviously, but do you ever talk to people outside of your own group?
Yeah, and there's some people who just live that way their whole lives and are just willfully ignorant. It's just horrifying to me. I mean, I'm Jewish, and I didn't grow up with a lot of anti-Semitism, but I grew up around casual Islamophobia, and when I saw that, I would just think to myself, how many of you actually know anyone who is Muslim? I mean, they're just normal people like anyone else. They're Americans, and it's just so ignorant, and it disgusts me when people just don't ever want to try to challenge their own prejudices, or just live in these bubbles for their whole lives and never really grow beyond what their parents taught them.
You know what I love? Facing Atheist said several years ago about Islam. He said he's glad that there's a lot of hypocrites in Islam, like Christianity, in the sense that they don't practice every facet of their faith. And the fact that they don't practice every facet of their faith, that means that there's going to be a lot of people that are not going to go and do what is considered a negative extreme. And that exists in Christianity and it exists in Islam. And so because of that, you can't sit there and make the judgment call that somebody's going to strap dynamite on you and going to blow you up or what have you. And it was an anti-Islamophobia commentary. It was actually a pretty good commentary.
That's interesting.
And I can forward you all the link if you like.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah,
sorry,
oh no, I'm just kind of thinking aloud. I'm thinking, I wouldn't say it's so much that they're hypocrites or not following their faith. I think what it is, though, obviously it does matter living in a pluralistic society. I mean, the fact is, majority of Muslims support gay marriage, for instance, in the U.S., and that's a part of the American story, and that might look different in a different context. But I'm also thinking that, you've ever met people who are so far to the left that they are, they support Putin?
Oh God, more often than I care to admit.
So what the result is, I think there's a version of like that in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, where it's like you're so on fire and so dogmatic for your religion that you're actually undermining the very logic of your religion. And I think that with the left, I mean, the reason you end up in pro-Putin territory is like you take the anti-U.S. imperialism critique to such an extreme that you actually defeat the point. Because the point of anti-imperialism is to be opposed to countries who, invade other countries, which is what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The point of Christianity is and Islam is supposed to be, kind of the love of neighbor, but now your dogmatism means you're doing something that's the exact opposite at this point.
Yeah, I'm guessing you both know who Mark Levin is on Fox News, right?
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
I can't stand that guy. I really despise him. But he said something that was fairly closest thing to being accurate one time. But there was one part of it that was not accurate, and he says the part that was accurate. He says, now there is a Putin wing to the Republican Party. That's a problem. In which that part was correct. But he says there was also a Putin wing to the Democratic Party, and it's virtually non-existent in the Democratic Party. The closest thing there was to a Putin wing to the Democratic Party, and she became an independent. That was so
falsy.
Yeah.
She is her own special case, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she might have been the closest thing. You got some independent far left people. Depends on individuals that would fit into that category. Certain sections of the anti-imperialist left that want to push the envelope, perhaps, but that's about where it will be. And a lot of them are going to be like F both parties, But
this reminds me of the Social Scholars Conference. I remember in the '90s going to visit, and I meet these people from Workers' World who are selling the papers, right? And they'd be like, "Do you oppose the bombing in Yugoslavia?" Yes, I do. Do you raise questions about what NATO is doing over there? Absolutely. You must support the socialist regime of Slobodan Milosevic. No. No, I'm not going to do that. Thank you, though. They kind of would hang out at the conference, and they'd always have their newspapers, and you kind of had to walk through a sea of these people, to get into the conference hall.
Most of the people I would run across back in the day were ISO people more than anything else. I mean, and of course they're no longer. I think ISO they kind of absorb themselves into DSA these days. They are no longer in existence. ISO, and I used to see them all over the place. Every rally I used to go to, the ISO was there like clockwork.
Oh yeah, are they even around? I was gonna say back in the day it was Socialist Workers.
I ran across Socialist Workers Party at one rally. The only time I ever met people from the Socialist Workers Party, one rally. RCP. There's maybe about 3 events. I've met some people from the RCP, but consistently it's been ISO most of the time. Workers World, I'm trying to think. One event I met Workers World. So I don't think I met some PSL people at the Assange rally in October, but they weren't like selling papers or anything like that.
That's so 20th century.
I think that they kind of stopped doing that. A lot of these groups, they stopped selling the papers. So yeah.
But I would say that they
Assange rally, I've noticed.
Yeah. What I've learned about socialism has helped me negotiate the Protestant world. So we have our splinters and sects.
Hello,
can you hear me?
Hello. Who's fading out? I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. No, I was just saying that I have the vision from Monty Python's Life of Brian. Good Christmas movie. You should all watch it for Christmas.
I'll have to watch that soon because that's a classic.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
Lincoln Bryan. Yeah, People's Judeo Front, Judeo's People's Front, and yeah, I
And
think
there's the
that's
one that has
probably,
only one member.
and I think that was probably in reference to maybe some of the Trotskyist groups that were splitting and counter splitting from each other, and probably in the UK in the 60s and 70s. That's what I think it came from.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I mean that's where I think that came from. But I was also saying, the first demonstration I went to in years, and I didn't see anybody. Well, there was one person peddling paper. I don't want to say peddling. He was a nice old man, but I bought the Socialist Action paper. About a issue. He was an older gentleman, been around activist for many years. I think he's in his 90s. This older person, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to buy paper from this, Socialist Action. Why not? So, but anyway, the alphabet soup of the entire left, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, that's exactly like I said. It helps me negotiate Christianity because people. I teach. I'll do like a world religion segment for the international students on our campus, and in most countries, you might have like a church or two. Like when my foster family in Norway, they have like maybe 4 or 5 churches in a town of 30,000 people, and then they come into the U.S. It's just like, I mean. I was in Sheridan, which had like 17,000 people, and we had like almost 60 churches.
Wow.
And yeah, it's like, and there's no framework, to kind of so. But like I said, I was involved in socialist politics, so it's like, oh yeah, this group split from this group, and then this, this Presbyterian group split from this Presbyterian group, and then they did this thing with the Baptists, and it feels similar.
Yeah, it definitely is similar. And in the same way, like I used to go to Jacobin reading groups and we would, read articles and argue over them. I always thought that to some extent it was like a secular equivalent of Bible studies.
Yes. I think that's right.
Yeah. Secular leftist equivalent.
And or kind of like how the Bible is useful that way too, because one other weird story. I'm telling weird socialist stories now. I used to when I was in high school.
Weird socialist stories could be a spin-off podcast or something. That would be great.
So I don't know if any of you have. I can't remember the name of the paper. The Socialist Labor Party, which I don't think
the people.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
it was. They would literally publish Daniel De Leon editorials.
That's right.
As the front headline article, and it would always be like, so the Republic. This is their. If they weren't publishing Daniel De Leon's own words as a current day editorial, what they were doing is to be like this. So, the Democrats want to invest in green technology, and maybe reduce emissions from coal plants, and of course the Republicans don't even admit that climate change is real. But what both fail to realize is that we need socialist industrial unions to take over. As Daniel De Leon clearly, indicated, and it doesn't matter, some people are talking about criminal justice reform, and some people are talking whether about the abolish the police. But what we really need are socialist industrial unions that could represent the police and a Congress of industrial organizations. And it didn't matter what the issue is; you just plug it into their.
It's like you could play a drinking game. Like every time they say socialist industrial union, take a shot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I apologize. My phone is going off.
No, that's okay. I remember when I went to England in 2006, I dedicated one day that trip to politics, and what a day it was. I spent the first part of the day visiting the Labour Party headquarters in the UK. And the funniest story about visiting the Labour Party headquarters was the man that gave me the tour guide. And this was when Blair was the prime minister. And he looked at me. He says, so I suppose you're with the Democrats in the United States. I said, no, but I am an old school socialist. And I I really love the legacy of people like Clement Attlee and people from the recent past, people like Michael Foote, one of the great opposition leaders, and people like Tony Benn. And he kind of looked at me like, what is wrong with him? Because it's, you know, New Labor and Tony Blair and all of that crap. Anyway, I was somewhat unimpressed with the Labor Party office. It was so corporate looking inside and so sanitized. I was just like, ew. And
that reminds me actually of in 2019 on election night, I went to in New York City because I was, you know, heavily invested in following Corbyn. I was kind of interested in trying to build, as I think a lot of people were, like a Bernie Corbyn Social Democrat International. And on election night, I went to a Labor Abroad party and everyone was drowning their sorrows, but you saw every faction of the Labor Party there. And I was like chatting with some people who just clearly were new Labor types that weren't a big fan of Corbyn. And they just looked at me like, who is this weirdo American that loves Corbyn so much? Because they were just very skeptical of me. So I feel like that is very akin to the story you just told, Willie.
Oh yeah.
And there's another story I want to add to that, to what you just said. And Dwight and I, we can tell you about a Blairite online that we fought with, but I need to tell you about the rest of my day in London after I left the UK. Labor, no problem. The Labor Party headquarters, went to the Fabian Society, which was a little more impressive. It was a hole in the wall of an office. And, you know, there was Che Guevara posters on the wall and library books and older lady. And she was just amazed that there was an American here. And we're about ready to do a conference, but you know, and she was like, we talked for a few minutes, so she was like, but we're meeting at a conference in a few minutes, but you come back after lunch. And I was like, well, I have to go. So you know, she was kind of pleased that I was there. And then the big highlight of my day was at the Maritime Union hall was the Socialist International, the worldwide Federation of Labor, Social Democratic, and Socialist parties. And I walked in there, and you know, I met with the really thinned down staff because everybody was gone for the holidays, as they like to call it over there. So I hung out with them for a couple of hours, and they gave me some campaign posters from around the world. And like from Norway and from South Africa and from Denmark, and I mean, so it's like, oh, this is really neat and everything. So and then that was, you know, that was my one Monday while I was over there in the UK. So I was like, I dedicated that day to politics. But Dwight and I belonged to the Labor Party Yahoo group back in when they had Yahoo groups.
Oh, yeah.
And we had. Well, most of the folks in that Labor Party group were sort of politically in the middle. They weren't old Labor, but they weren't like Blairites either. And I guess Dwight and myself, and I guess we will all be considered somewhat old Labor in that group. Well, there was one obnoxious Blairite by the name of Mike Allett. Remember that guy, Dwight?
Oh goodness, yeah. That, yeah. I mean, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Oh yeah, no, he was he was just a right winger. I don't mean he was a conservative Labor person. I mean he was positively pro Thatcher, but somehow got enamored by Tony Blair, which makes sense on one level. Though one of the secrets of the Labor Party, which never really got received near the credit that it might, is that Labor actually invested a ton of money into so much of the welfare state, including the healthcare system. Looking back, after they got into power, conservatives, in 2010, 12 years later, if you were to think about the kind of money that was flowing to the National Health Service, it's like it wasn't actually very Thatcherite at all, what less. But I get why. Because I think it was that theory of politics that said, well, if you just what you do is you let corporations do whatever you want, then you tax them and you get that money, and then you pay for your welfare state that way. And that was the third way politics of that era. But anyhow, yeah, I I suspect there are folks who are still kind of addicted to those kind of sets of ideas. In the end, I do think they represent it. I think if you do overcome polarization, it won't be because of that. It'll be something else. I think that's the deal. In other words, I remember I saw a video for Tony Blair, and he was running in '97. I'm not interested or left or right. I'm interested in a third way. Somehow, and you're like, no, it never produced that, So we got to, if you want to bring people together, it's not, like I said, it's not meeting Biden and MAGA halfway.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever people say I'm neither left versus right, that always sets off red flags in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is,
he used to be in the Labor Party, and then he said he left the Labor Party, and so I was like, well, so where were you before you came back to the Labor Party? He never directly answered that question, and so I said, sounds like you were definitely not voting Labor for years. I wonder how you were voting, and because he always talked very well of Thatcher and everything, and I pretty much told him how I felt about Thatcher. I wasn't very generous, in my opinion, and there was another person that was in the group that Dwight and I knew from the Socialist Party, Andrew Hammer, which I think he's now high ranking in Masonry today. He wrote a book called "Observing the Craft," which is about the labor movement in relation to Masonry. He is a soft Blairite, by the way. He's not like this guy Mike Allett. If he's a Blairite, he's like a left Blairite. Wouldn't you say, Dwight?
Boy, yeah, I haven't seen him for so long. I do think, but that was probably right. I think it was kind of fun to read the magazine in his day because he was really in conversations with so many of the European parties.
What was the magazine?
Yeah, he had a lot of contact.
The Socialist magazine.
Oh, cool.
Mike Allett asked him. He says, where are you in terms of labor? Are you new labor or are you old labor? And he responded, I am where the Labor Party is at the moment. He gave a very spin doctor-ish response. So I was just like, oh my God, that was such a BS answer if I ever heard one.
Yeah, that reminds me of the phrase of credited to Harold Wilson that socialism is whatever the Labor Party happened to be doing at any one time. What?
That was the answer he gave to Mike Allett. I am where the Labor Party is at the moment.
At the moment. But the funny thing is, they actually polled Americans as on who are independents, and what they discovered was they weren't independent because they agreed with Washington Post journalists that we need a little more fiscal conservatism and gay marriage, right? They were independent in the sense of they're like, I want national health care and we need to lock gays up. I believe in climate change and we need to ban abortion tomorrow. The reason they're independent is they couldn't figure out a way to. It wasn't that they were moderate.
Yeah.
It's that they can't link themselves to the Democratic or Republican Party because nobody would accept them.
And there's like an infinite number of combinations of those views. Like I've also occasionally read America Magazine, which is the Jesuit publication, and they're like extremely anti-racist, extremely pro-refugee, and generally pro-universal healthcare, but also very anti-abortion. And then there's probably like secular racists who are pro-choice, but like hardcore anti-immigrant types.
Yep, that's exactly.
Well, I mean, that's what it means to. No. Oh, I'm saying I have friends from the Catholic worker movement that describes what you described, Pat. O'Neill, who's was the late David McReynolds, and he knew David McReynolds back in the days of the War Resisters League. Joey, do you keep in touch with them, the War Resisters League at all?
I haven't in a while. The last time I saw people from them was at David McReynolds' memorial service, but I should try to get in touch with them and find out what they're doing these days, because I did have the opportunity to meet and talk to a lot of them at David McReynolds' apartment when he used to have his monthly gatherings. And they seemed like a really good, really sort of principled, committed group of activists that I respect a lot.
Yeah, there was an interesting thing. He mentioned McReynolds. He's in the documentary called Undocumented. And it's a story. It's like it's a little biography of David McReynolds. 15 minutes long. He came out of the closet in the 1950s, and even in the socialist movement, homophobia was rife. And as it was in most sectors of the society, but he was able to come out because he was in the pacifist movement. And the pacifist movement was probably one of the first spaces where you could live an openly LGBT life in the U.S. So, yeah, I can imagine those are some pretty cool folks.
Yeah, I remember what he told me was that, yes, I was a gay socialist, but where I was working, I had excellent job security, so I could just be open about things that he otherwise never would have been in that context. So that also does speak highly of them, that the fact that as far back as the 1950s, they were more progressive, more accepting even of gay rights than virtually anyone else, given what a viciously homophobic time that was.
Yeah.
What I love about David McReynolds is he managed to remain a beatnik for the rest of his life. I was like, it's like time stood still. He remained a 1950s beatnik to the day he died.
Totally. I remember going to his apartment, and he always had the best weed. He always had several joints being passed around. So I definitely felt that. I started to feel like he was almost like, he could have been like a great uncle to me. Like if I had like a gay beatnik socialist great uncle.
We all need to have a gay socialist.
Yeah.
He never call it pot or weed. He always call it marijuana.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's old
And
school.
I used to be a smoker back then. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting. I'm so sorry.
I know the problem.
I used to be a smoker back in the day, and he was like, you need to give up the tobacco habits, because when you keep smoking, you're giving money to Jesse Helms. If you must smoke, pick up marijuana. Smoke marijuana on a regular basis. I said, well, Dave, I've smoked marijuana over the years, not on a regular basis, but I don't mind getting high every now and then. But he was just like that. He's always smoked marijuana, and he's he used to smoke cigarettes in the past, but he gave that up. But anyway, I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you both, and I'm so sorry about that.
No, this is good. No, I'm just I'm thinking that there's always, in every family, there's always a gay uncle. I'm going like every family needs to have a gay socialist beatnik uncle.
Right on.
That would do a lot to solve our politics in this country.
Actually, absolutely. And then like an anarchist trans woman aunt.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Actually, there is I do have a distant transgender relative that I need to tell Catherine about. A fairly distant one. I'm not related by blood, but it's my dad's cousin's ex-husband's cousin that is became a transgender woman. Anyway, I know that's I need to tell Catherine.
Was she politically active to your knowledge?
I don't know a thing about her. Other than that.
Well, I know I'm going to have to go here in a sec, but I didn't know if you.
Me too, actually.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this though. We definitely need to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the rapport. And honestly, I think there's nothing wrong in a sense with interrupting each other. I mean, I'm interested in linguistics as just a personal interest, and there's been studies that have showed that when people interrupt each other, when people finish each other's sentences, it shows that they genuinely like each other and have a bond. So I think that there's something very down to earth about that, in a way that we can know sort of predict what the other person's going to say next and sort of add on to it.
Yeah, that's the way to look at it. That is the way to look at it. So and all of that. So yeah, and as I said, I felt like this was a very fruitful discussions we had here, and all of that, and any plans? Well, this is going. We can say this is videos for the future, Christmas Eve. So anyway, any plans for the year 2023?
My goal is to start, obviously I might be going back to school. I'm also trying to possibly start a band again. And I would say that my main New Year's resolution, though, is to finally complete one of the sci-fi short stories, because I have mentioned that I'm a writer, and I mostly have written nonfiction, but a passion of mine that haven't really found the time for yet is to start writing, or is to just complete, to write like fiction short stories, particularly sci-fi, and submit them around and hopefully get one published.
That's great. That'd be neat.
Yeah.
How about you, Dwight? Any plans for the year 2023 for you?
Boy, I mean, the cool thing,
Necessarily.
we're bringing an autistic comedian to our campus. He's like famous in Canada, but not the U.S. But I'm really excited for this in March. So he does stand up. He has several TV shows in Canada, and he's kind of the public face for autism in so many ways in Canada. So we're bringing
What's his name?
Michael McCreary.
Oh, I think I have heard of him, actually.
Yeah, he's got the Facebook page, Funny You Don't Look Autistic, as his page, as well as the book that he's written. So that's I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm not sure. I would say that my husband bugs me to because I have book ideas, but I never really follow through with anything. So a lot of it has to do with just maybe more writing about relating to college students, because I've been doing college work now for a number of years. So it feels like, are there lessons learned that we could think about and faith communities can think about? So, yeah, we'll see.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Good luck.
What are you up to next year?
Oh, let's see. Well, I'm hoping for this channel to grow, that I have here, and that I will do a little more traveling, because that's something I love to do, and try to just make it through another day, and do a little more activism, because I for many years, now that I have weekends off, I can dedicate some time to some level of activism that I wasn't able to for many years, due to a work schedule that would not allow me to for the longest time. Because usually whenever there's an event that's set up, it's usually on short notice, and I can't go because work has me constrained. I mean, I like a year and a half ago, I would have loved to have gone to some of these Medicare for All marches that were being set up in North Carolina. I think there was one in Greenville, Greensboro, one in Raleigh. I would have loved to have gone to some of these, for example, and I wasn't able to. So, when something like that comes across again, or a decade ago, I went to one Occupy rally. I mean, and I'm like, in the last decade, I went to one Occupy rally. I'm like, I got to do better than that.
I would say you are doing much better now. You're rocking with this channel, and so I wish you all the best with that. I hope to meet up with you at some of those events, possibly, and maybe we could do a show in person one day. The three of us.
That'd be cool. I'm
Yeah.
all over that. We just got to get you guys out in the Montana. You see.
I would love to. I'd love to go to Montana. I bet I bet it's beautiful out there.
Yeah.
It
Well,
is.
I
We're
mean,
buried in snow, but yes, it is
well,
gorgeous.
closest I've been to Montana was Colorado. I went to the convention in Boulder, and
Mhm.
interesting thing about Boulder was Pine Street. Three interesting facts about Pine Street in Boulder, Colorado. The young model girl that was dead, that got killed, lived on Pine Street. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh no! Oh no! I'm not sure I do.
He looks
I
like a
remember
grown up. He looks like a little person.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay, she was well known at the time, and she lived on that street. The house on Mork and Mindy, the TV show, also on Pine Street. And the 1996 Socialist Party candidate for president, Mary Cole Hollis, also lives on Pine Street.
Wow,
Oh, that was fun hanging out at her house, but that's
Yeah.
That would make for an interesting article, like a little known famous street in America that very, very few people know has a lot of significant events associated with it.
Yeah, her then husband David picked me up at the hotel and drove me to their house, and he picked me up in their Volvo, and it was just like I was like, nice. I was like, got a Volvo here, I love it. He's like, yeah, it's a nice social democratic car. Little Swedish thing there. So I know y'all got to go, so I'm not going to keep y'all. If you need to sign out, and I will share a few words with my audience here, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and all the best to you both, and happy 2023 coming up.
Hear, hear. Same to both of you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Wish I had a drink on me, but cheers anyway.
In spirit, yeah. All right, take care.
All right, take care. All right. So anyway, yep. Anyway, it's been a very good discussion, Dwight, and I hope everything turns out well for you and all that. Are you planning to stay in Montana? Because I know you moved around quite a bit for the last few years.
Oh yeah, no, I think I got a good home here, so
you're settled.
I think so. Yeah, campus ministry has been huge. So.
Yes, I remember you were like this state, and that since I've known you, you were just like a year or two in this state, a year or two in that state, a year or two. So I was like, where are you going to move to next?
Well, it's the longest state I lived in as an adult, because I lived for first 26 years in Montana, right? But I was in Illinois for 7 years, in Southern Illinois, and but. Once I figured out a way to get back to Montana, it's been very good. So, and working with college students on the campus like this has been great too. So,
yeah.
So I'm going to have to head myself. I'm thinking, we should do something. Maybe we should do another thing with Joey, do a New Year's kind of kickoff. It might not be on the 31st, but just something to.
January, I'll be. I don't know what I will be doing on the 31st, but the group that I belong to, KRTD, they're working on New Year's Eve celebrations, that they're going to be doing activities all day long. And actually, I don't know if I'm doing anything one way or the other yet. That's what I'm about to find out in a few days, I guess, at their board meeting, because I'm pretty new there, so. I don't know where.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, keep me up to breast, but we will do this again at some point.
Absolutely. And you take it easy, okay? Have a great weekend, all right?
You too. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care. All right. All right, folks. That was Dwight Welch, and that was Joey McCorrin. And we talked about what we talked about for almost the last 2 hours. So anyway, I should have mentioned this earlier this evening, and I'm sorry I did not. And so while it's fresh on my mind, I will say this: super chats, here the chat line, and we're monetized now at KRTD. So if there's any donations, if you want to donate, please donate and help independent media. Help us, because we need to grow, and you're doing your part to help us to grow. And I appreciate the support that y'all have given to us to help us grow. So and I feel very privileged to do what I'm doing here, to helping out the folks here at KRTD, and I hope that that I'll continue to do that and help make the channel grow, and see all others in independent media, especially those on the left here, do the same. So there is also that. So I want to say to each and every one of you that it's a Saturday night, so around midnight that Warren and Miss Jimmy are going to be doing the secret show in a short while, and be sure to watch. And it's on Extra Booyah, that's the name of the channel. But on Saturday night is the secret show, and be sure to watch them. They're a great team. They are a great team. Great conversations and great dialogue with the people on the chat lines and all that too. And remember, I am to also to subscribe to this channel, the Willie Bragg Show here. Subscribe to KRTD Media, and to encourage each and every one of you to form your own platform and utilize it, because we are the muckrakers of our time, and to do it in favor of free speech, and to reach out to people, because the corporate media has nothing to offer to us, not a damn thing. So and when it comes to the corporate media and its narrative, you know what I say: get a second opinion, get 33 opinions if you need to. So there is also that. And let me just say that until next time, I will I'm going to be cutting this short, because I work graveyard shift, and I do need to get some sleep on 1:19 p.m. right now, December 15th, because this is going to be aired on December 24th. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy 2023. So I will sign off right now. You all take it easy. Take care.